Hello everyone and welcome to the iSpring Solutions webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today as we're going to speak about how to choose an authoring tool and complete checklist for it. My name is Paulina, I am a community manager and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. As a speaker we have our very own favorite Michael Shiashi. Hi Michael, how are you doing?
Hi Paulina, I'm doing great. How are you this morning?
I'm good, thanks for asking. Michael did a webinar, the last webinar for us on virtual reality and you guys liked it a lot, so we decided to invite him one more time so that he could share his talk on the choosing an authoring tool, and he actually provided a talk for it for the Learning Solutions Conference that we just attended last week, and it was really nice, and we surely will be posting a blog post about it. All right, so I think that at this point we are almost ready to begin. I just want to quickly mention that if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, please share them in the question box, which should be on the right side of your GoToWebinar panel. And I'm going to pass the presenter rights to Michael right now.
Great, thank you Paulina. So welcome everyone and thank you for joining. I appreciate it, and thank you Paulina and iSpring for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be here. As Paulina mentioned, this is a, we'll call it an encore presentation of a session I did at Learning Solutions Conference. And I should be sharing my screen. Paulina, you can see it, correct?
I can see it, yes.
Good. So as you see, we have several slides to go through, and I just wanted to show everyone that. So I'd like to get through all these as quickly as possible because the important part is I want to get to the end. So at the end, sort of a surprise for everyone, we have available the options and a self-survey that you can take in order to figure out what your interests are, what your needs are, and how to choose your e-learning authoring tool. And we will have this available at the end, and I'll provide the link at the end. So being that, we have several slides. Again, welcome everyone, how to choose an e-learning authoring tool. My name is Michael Shiashi. Just a little bit about me. I have been in the e-learning and IT industry for 20 years now. I got into it because I have a strong affinity for pop culture. I also academically aligned myself because I have a film degree and a 3D modeling degree in order to do simulations video games. So I'm currently a technologist at Alternative Media, among the many hats I wear. So as we go through today, we're going to talk about the different choices and different considerations you need for an e-learning authoring tool. I'd invite all of you, please interject and ask questions as you need be. Paulina will help moderate and she will stop me whenever needed in order to answer some questions. So the thing is, there's no, this is the right choice, this is the wrong choice for any of us. We all have authoring tools that we may have used, may be familiar with, may have heard. But keep in mind, as I go through these are just an overview of what I have to do. So these are overviews of what I see as a personal view of e-learning authoring tools and what's out there and how to categorize them. And I'm not alone. There's a lot of people talking about this. Recently at an ATD conference in New Orleans, I witnessed Diane Elkins giving a presentation on online resources, for e-learning authoring tools comparison. Here's an image from that talk as well as her blog link down below. And keep in mind, any of the links I provide here, I'll also at the end provide a link to my presentation slide today on iSpring Cloud. So as you can see, there's a link from iSpring as well that they compare e-learning authoring tools as well. So there is a lot of information as well online. In fact, there's a really large foundation of information available from ADL. You can see on screen 2014. This is a very large PDF document, and it's been updated here and there, but the link is available down below and in the slides. So what I have done, in addition to all these resources from a personal standpoint, as a developer, as a programmer, as a designer, I have also looked at it from the sources available online, and I provided them here as well. Today we're going to try to consolidate those into a concise package for you, kind of overview. So I like to talk about e-learning content itself. Now remember, we're authoring content, so we want to talk about different levels of interactivity. And I borrow my choices of e-learning levels from the Chapman Alliance. They have a really great set of slides online about about how long e-learning takes to create, and I've used it for several years, and it's a really great resource. I invite you to check it out. But in that, we talk about levels of content interactivity. Level 1 I would call a page turner. And unfortunately, those of us that have been doing e-learning and training for a number of years are very, very unfortunately familiar with this. This would be, your slide deck, your compliance training that no one wants to take. There's very little activity. There's a lot of reading, and you just go page, 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 page. So very often there might be a few images. They're not dynamic. They may be stock photos or clip art. And there's usually no audio or video. Now, these are just general categories. Remember, there could always be exceptions. Level 2, and again, I'm borrowing from the Chapman Alliance, is some, those page turners that may have limited interaction, including knowledge checks or other small exercises. They definitely have images. The image is a little bit better, and they have some audio and video potentially in them. These, of course, as we think about it, take a little bit more development time to create. And then there's those level 3s where I would say full-blown simulations, say like a video game or serious game. These are very interactive. They're at the height of the level of interactivity. They can be immersive. They may require both audio and visual cues, as well as maybe in the picture you see a mechanical input as well. So they can be quite complex when you think about them. And these are at the top of the tier levels. So now that we've talked about content, let's talk about the type of authoring tools in general categories. Much of this is borrowed from that ADL document I showed you, and some of it's from my own conjectures. So as we consider it, one type of category is rapid development. Now, this really suggests a lot of time, and we have a lot of tools we may call rapid development because we have, either they've been billed as that or they've been sold to us as rapid development tools, and that's great, and that's good, and it's good to have that in our toolbox. But just for a categorical sense, this would be ones that you could do a robust set of level 1, 2, or 3 development in a very short amount of time. Meaning, for instance, those, remember, we used to use Flash. Hopefully we don't anymore. I'm sure we still do. Flash allowed us to create graphic elements as well as deal with the audio, deal with the video, as well as some programming. So Flex would be a tertiary rapid development tool as well, code-based and on the back end to help your applications and such. Then we have the category of web-based or cloud-based e-learning authoring tools. Some examples that might be Brainshark, Claro, Lectora, Luminosity, Rapid Intake. Some of these you probably have heard of and or used. These would be ones where you log in from your machine, usually by browser, and the software is contained in the cloud or on a server somewhere, meaning you don't have to download very much of it, if anything, as far as the authoring tool, and it's all done off-site or off machine. So as a contrast to that, another category would be desktop, and so this would be what more of you might be familiar with: Captivate, Course Builder, Course Lab, EXE, iSpring, Lectora, Storyline, Dreamweaver, and Visual Studio. Those of you from a programming C# or C++ background may remember Visual Studio, helps you compile code and probably sits behind quite a bit of applications such as Unity 3D and such. So as we think of these desktop-based software authoring tools and e-learning authoring tools, these would be ones that actually sit on your machine, or you download the majority of it and you produce it on your actual laptop or desktop. So. And then we have those systems, sims or simulations that also do screen caps. This is a category by itself. Now, you'll note as we go through these, some of these categories overlap, but for the most part, I've tried to encapsulate the examples of each on each slide. So examples of this would be Captivate, and of course, if everyone's familiar with Camtasia Studio, there are a number of tools that also do screen cap, say iSpring or Storyline. But remember, in this point, we're just encapsulating it. These particular programs, let's take Camtasia, specialize in screen capturing, and we would say system sims or software simulations in this respect, because primarily the use would be to simulate on-screen experiences, UI, so that the learner can do a trial run of, say, a software system or an environment and be able to do that over and over. So another type of category, as I kind of alluded to earlier, would be Unity 3D or Game Studio, Game Salad. Those of you that have been doing e-learning for a while may have heard of Torque Game Engine about 10 years ago. Then, of course, open source versions of that would be Blender, which is an open source 3D software suite that allows you to create games and sims as well as 3D modeling and such. So These are a category by themselves. These are packages and software solutions that allow you to create very interactive and very immersive environments for your learners. Again, that's a category on its own. And then sort of a weird hybrid category that's come out in the, the last 10 to 15 years is LCMS. And it's not weird in that it exists, it's just a weird amalgamation sometimes from a technology standpoint on the back end. These are learning content management system, wherein a content management system also is integrated with the learning management system, so that not only do you allow multiple users to input and provide content and work on content and develop it perhaps, it also houses it and serves it up and deals with the SCORM, the SCORM standard and such. Like an LMS, it logs in the users, allows them to figure out what's going on, and also be tracked. So some Total Learn and MindFlash are examples of these. We have a category for converters and plugins. Many of you are probably familiar with this with iSpring, Presenter, AuthorPoint. These are ones that would typically either sit inside an environment or outside of it, that would normally take an environment, say PowerPoint, convert it over to an e-learning environment, or a plugin that would sit inside of something like PowerPoint and allow you to create a more interactive, more immersive e-learning content from within. And again, iSpring is one of those particular, as well as several other categories as well. And for those any coders in the room or programmers, there's always the code version of it. So when we're creating e-learning authoring solution, coding is always an option. So that would be HTML, HTML5, native device like Java or Xcode on iOS or Android, or hybrid, which would be a mix of one of those plus HTML5. Some libraries and software packages would include PhoneGap, Sencha, Titanium, and then old school Dreamweaver. So as I pause for just a moment before we go into the media types, which is going to be very brief, Paulina, are there any questions yet?
No, there are no questions, so I think that you can just keep going.
Okay, thank you. So we've covered the categories of levels of content as well as categorical levels of the actual software itself and e-learning authoring tools. Some media, of course, would be, how does the authoring tool import audio? Is it easy to add? Can you edit it? Are there compression limits? Does it simply import it and that's all you can do? Same consideration for video. So as we move forward and as we think about e-learning authoring tools, think about how you might use them. Do you have video? Does it need to be housed in the same place? Does it need to be edited or trimmed in the authoring tool? That sort of things. So going along with the idea of levels of interactivity, we want to engage our learners, and many of us use knowledge checks, assessment, and other items to engage. One item you may consider when looking at e-learning authoring tools is how to score your learners and get the results back to where they need. Do you need to send that score to a platform? Does it need to go to the learner via email or to their managers or to their higher-ups? Do they need to print it out as a just-in-time tool to see sort of where they need to go in the future? Will the e-learning authoring tool allow that? Does it have code for that? Thinking beyond these sort of assessments and knowledge checks, does the tool allow questions that could be created, say, drag and drop or sequential, fill in the blank? Can it do something like simulated conversation for those sales trainers, wherein you train sales like, what would you say in this response? Or, how well did you do? As we consider moving forward, we want to ask, who is this for? We talk about not only our contributors to the learning or the e-learning authoring tool, but also our end users. So think about your teams, think about their use. Will this be used by non-technical people? As mentioned earlier with the content management system, will there be need for collaboration or file share? Where do you sit? Do you have technical developers? Do you have non-technical people that need to input? What are the technical requirements on your side or the hardware requirements of that e-learning authoring tool? Some considerations as you think of e-learning authoring tools. Do you need to add additional triggers or code? Some, like Storyline and others, have inherent triggers inside. Do you need one that only has these, or do you need to be able to bring in code elsewhere from, say, external scripts or APIs, classes or extensions? Think about this as you consider. Also, we want to continue, as I mentioned, the e-learning interactivity. Does the tool allow for creation inside of it of nice eye candy, I call it, of niceties of animation, something built in? Does it allow it built in, or if you create it outside of it, are they easy to add? As you create all of these, let's think about the end result. So how are we going to publish? What's the package that we're going to include? We may be publishing for desktop only, say for an intranet or internal users. And if so, is this, say, standalone like exe or other? Or is this something, say, browser-based that we can allow inside? So certain content e-learning software provide for one or the other. Or do you need to go to native? Mobile only, and does it need to be coded natively or say hybrid, which is a mix of HTML5 and native code? Let's say you need to do all devices existing. Can the e-learning authoring tool provide that? Can you develop once and deploy many, which is the current application? So as you're considering deployment, do you need to deploy to an LMS or an LRS, either one? And if so, if it's an LMS, of course, you need to talk about SCORM, CMI, what version. If it's an LRS, of course, you need to talk about XAPI or Tin Can API, as many of you may know. So these considerations need to be, can the tool publish to both of those? Also think about outside of those technical requirements. So if you purchase an e-learning authoring tool, what's the support? What's the community like? Are there online tutorials? Is there an existing image or code library? What's the frequently asked questions? Is there documentation online? How easy is it to get to? So these are considerations that go above and beyond what you would necessarily think. Of course, many of us have the question of budget. How much does it cost? And that's a very important question for all of us, no matter our level, because we certainly have to watch our purchase. So as you consider it, do you need an initial purchase, or the current subscription-based is usually the way to go? And so do both of those or either one fit within your needs? What about after purchase? Is there additional support you can obtain? Is there training? Are there service contracts or other items? So we want to make sure that we consider these. Additionally, as we go beyond all these items, the content, the publishing, the cost, some niceties. How easy are templates? Are there ready-made templates? Are they included? Can we get additional ones? Specifically, this would go back to the idea of, say, non-technical users or even technical users to allow for the rapid development of particular content and such. Is there a seat limit? And sometimes there is. Say an LCMS may have a seat limit. Can I only have a certain number of end users? And what happens if I go beyond that? Questions you need to ask yourself as you begin looking. Going back to the templates, how easy is it to customize things? Say you use a template. Are you easily able to change it and add new content? And to what level and how far can you take it? So as always, this has been a topic recently, not recently, but recently for me, to ensure I have very succinct code. How accessible is it? And I'm not talking about accessible to mobile, but I'm talking about accessibility to our users. And so for those of us in the US or those that have federal clients, you may know that you deal with Section 508, but globally we look at the WCAG 2.0 standard. And so remember that depending on who's looking at the policy, the interpretation may be a little different each time. However, beyond all that and beyond the conjecture, what is the way that your tool handles that? Does the e-learning authoring tool allow keyboard navigation? Can you edit the tab order? Are you able to tab to each one clearly? Does the screen reader clearly read each element on screen? Is there a way to edit it if need be? Are there constrictions, or I'm sorry, are there any ways to get around this? So what I want to do is talk about everything I've talked about, again, in very rapid pace. However, there's a lot of information to consider when we look at any development tool or e-learning authoring tool. Here's everything I've talked about, and this is as all on one screen. You can see we've gone from the content to the categories, talking about just a little dipping our toes in the water of the media, and then talking about engagement through assessments, how scores need to be sent back if need be, what perhaps a development tool provides, who's going to use it, and can those individuals add outside code, or is it built in? What's the level of interactivity that can be coded? How it can be packaged and published, whether it's for cross-platform or even on an LMS or LRS. What kind of support can you receive after purchase? What your budget or return on investment might be? And then some things to be included outside of these would be, are there templates? Can you purchase extra? Can you obtain extra? How easy is it to customize? And of course, accessibility. How can you edit it so that it's more globally accessible for all your users? So what I want to do is give you this link on screen. This is the entire checklist that we have just viewed, and I will show you this here. I will go into my screen. Now I've created this with iSpring, and this is all the questions and content and criteria that we've looked at. Let's take a quick look at that. So what you'll see as you go through and use this link is that a survey will come up, and it'll have almost in the exact same order what we went through. And you can add your name and email, and I'm not tracking any of this, so this is the only reason we need the email is so it can be sent to you. You can skip this part if you want, but you would add your name and information here. The email is whatever email you pick in order to have the results sent to you. And again, we're just looking at exactly what I just went over. We'll look at answering what sort of level of activity are you looking at, level 1, 2, or 3 for an e-learning authoring tool. What are your druthers for, how you want to develop the categories, what type of media do you need, video. So you can go through all the questions as we've seen, and there's 17 of them. And at the end, you can also have this email all the results to yourself, so you can sort of see your own footprint of what your needs are from an e-learning authoring tool. So that's it, and I know that's a lot of information, but again, this is not an easy choice, and there's no right or wrong. So I did want to be as comprehensive as possible and get through as much as possible. So as we do that, Polina, are there any questions?
Can you please go back to the slide with the link so that people can actually click through it? And I will paste it into the comment section too.
Sure, and that's a good point. So I have on screen, and so I'll say it for those audio listeners. So https://ispri.ng/x8jkv. And so that's the short link. Additionally, I have provided the link for this particular slide deck, so you should be able to reach it that way as well. And I believe Polina can send it as well.
The video of the video of this webinar and also the presentation will be sent to all the attendees and everyone who registered for the webinar. So
certainly understood.
This will be shared. And Michael, do you have any tips? The question from Katie, do you have any tips for test driving options?
I think that's a good point, and so I don't necessarily have any tips, but I do know that many of the e-learning authoring tools out there, and especially the major ones, offer a trial. So they may have a trial where you can download either a portion of the development tool or the entirety of it, and actually try it out and do a test drive and see if it fits within the constraints of your needs, if it works well, if there's a sharp learning curve, which some of them really are. So it all depends on your needs. I think that's a good question. I think that's one that we may even need to include in the slide deck, which is, how would you go about testing some of these items? In this particular talk, I just wanted us to have a large consideration of all of the categories and all of the elements that may be needed when you begin looking at the development tool for content. So the test drive is certainly an important aspect of that, and certainly as you begin making decisions that include dollar signs or whatever your currency is, one that actually is very important. Specifically, if you've tried it out and you like it, it's a little bit easier to validate the reason to purchase it. So good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And the next question is from Alan. Do you have a view on tool available from open source?
There are a few that I mentioned open source. Let me go back here. So it depends now, not one online or not one open source would fit everyone. I did have a couple of examples that were open source. And some of these have a higher learning curve. Let's talk about higher to level 3 interactivity. I mentioned Blender, seen on screen. Blender is an open source software development tool for 3D modeling, animation. It also does compositing, say like for video. You can also do 3D sculpting, say like you would be familiar with ZBrush and such. It's open source, but it has an extensive community. However, that being said, it's still, like any 3D modeling tool, has a high learning curve. So there are some other desktop-based versions. You see Course Builder and EXE. Personally, I've not used EXE, so I couldn't tell you anything about it. It was listed on that ADL document that I mentioned earlier, which kind of goes through a lot of this information. Take a look at this if you have a question. It's very extensive. It's a long read, but it's very thorough. And that's one of the ones that's mentioned inside this document. Now, again, you see it was last published or updated version 8 in 2014, but a lot of the information is quite pertinent even today. And for those of you that are coders or old Flash coders, you may remember that Flex, certain libraries of that is open source as well, I believe. So it's a good question. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Paulina, you may be on mute, by the way.
I'm sorry, I am, of course. Yeah, there are questions about the link that you shared. Can you go back to it one more time because...
Yes, I'm going right there. Sorry. There we go. So it's on screen.
Yes. Are there any upper or lowercase characters in it?
I don't believe it would matter either way. So this particular font that I use today has it in upper case, but let me go back to my browser. Maybe a little harder to see, but once we get in here, if I simply pasted that, it wouldn't matter. So let me grab this slide and I'll show you.
Can you paste that link in the comment section? I'm sorry, in the chat box and send it to the entire audience?
Sure, no problem. So I see the question pane, the type message here. Sorry, there we go. So there's the link in little tiny letters. All right. Let me put the link back up. All right, any further questions?
Yeah, there's actually a question from Minna. We have decided on the purchase of iSpring and would like to have a tutorial on advanced features. How do we get that demo? To answer this question, I would like to say that I will reach out to you after the webinar and we will be able to discuss that option after it. So we can either set a demo with you, or if you need like a really thorough training on iSpring, you can definitely get it from our technical support as well.
Right, and that's a good point. So what I also, if anyone has any questions either today or from, say, viewing this later, I'm going to add my email. They can contact iSpring directly or contact me, either one. I welcome any questions and appreciate them. As always, when we begin talking about this, since it's such a complex issue, there are always follow-on questions and specific cases that differ from what we've discussed today.
And Michael, do you know by any chance if there is an option to add pre-coded logic into the quizzes in iSpring?
There, specifically pre-coded logic such as, say, code or... So one thing I would say to that is iSpring has a lot of different tools available to allow easy development of it. And so specifically to iSpring, one that I find that uses node-based logic, and I know that's not exactly what was asked, but is the TalkMaster, and allows you to visually code both the input and output, meaning you would ask a question or have a certain set of criteria, and then you would visibly pull a node over to the outcome. So, but also within, I believe, and Paulina, correct me, you can also import questions into the quiz creator. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. So other than that, there might be some other specific logic, and we can answer that on a case-by-case basis. But a lot of it has to do with, actually what you're inputting. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also there was one question about sharing the presentation. Um, I'll be sharing the link to it in the chat box, and also it will be sent, the link to the presentation, and also the recording of the webinar will be sent to all the webinar attendees. So guys, you will receive it.
Right, and after that, you'll also have, as you see on screen, the link to the actual self-survey that you can go through and also answer the questions and see the results of kind of what you answered for yourself. So.
Yeah, Michael, and can you share with us how do you usually choose an authoring tool?
I have many different clients, and so my authoring tool, the joke we usually say is I'm e-learning tool agnostic, and so that really means I use whatever tool either that is required by the client, preferred by the client, or paid for by the client. And I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but that's really true. So one way I come at this, of course, is talking about from a personal perspective. In my own personal use, I would say one that's easy to use, but also one that allows for customization. Because it's all well and good to have something out of the box that works and works well. And I have to commend iSpring for it works great out of the box, and it looks good on almost all devices. I mean, almost, I'd say almost, but every device I tested. And so with that, I would say not only easy to use from a development standpoint, but looks good on the user and learner perspective as well. So I do also have, from a personal perspective, a long history of coding and programming. So I do like to inject a lot of code when needed to customize. So I look at different things, but it really depends on my client, my stakeholder, and my audience.
So do you think there are any all-purpose tools out there on the market?
Well, interestingly enough, I think there's a lot that work well for a broad category of purposes, but there's not one tool that works for everyone.
Right.
I wish there was, but there's always an exception to the case. But there's a lot of tools available, and we talked about a lot of them. iSpring, Lectora, Storyline, a lot of different tools, and even some that I wasn't able to cover that may be newer than my research and studies. But there's always going to be that external case, and the important thing is that we consider the criteria, the people that are creating it and using that software. We make sure we get their input as well, in addition to just the people paying for it. Say if we're looking at enterprise level e-learning authoring tool. So.
Right, and in most of the cases, clients think that sometimes they need this feature, but when they start analyzing what they actually want to achieve, what their goals are, they can turn to a totally different tool that they will use for their purpose.
That's right, and I think that goes back to the question of testing. So, taking something for a test drive or a trial is a great way to see if it does indeed fit your needs. Many times we may look at the online pamphlet of information about a tool and say, yeah, I think that does, and we'll get into it, and it may not do exactly what we need. So those software suites that allow for a free trial or a test drive, as I call it, is really a great resource for us to use.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, so actually at this point looks like we have no other questions coming. And if you guys do have any questions, this is the best time to ask them. And I would like to thank you, Michael. Yes, sure, Samith, you can definitely ask your question. So at the meantime, I would like to thank Michael for putting together this wonderful presentation and sharing that link to the self-paced checklist. I think it will be very useful to the audience.
Good. Thank you for having me, Paulina, and thanks to iSpring for hosting this. I really appreciate it. And again, I welcome any comments or suggestions or chat after, so please contact Paulina if you have anything.
Right. I will definitely put you guys in contact. All right. So if you guys do have any questions, you are more than welcome to submit them to the customer.care@ispringsolutions.com. I will quickly put the email address in the chat box right now so that you have it. And we will get back to you as soon as possible. All right, so I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you at our next webinar, and we will be sending the invite to you shortly. Thanks again, Michael. Thanks everyone for attending, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.